Considering it's a medium pretty much built on the art of murder, it's kind of surprising how few effective deaths there are in video game stories. Sure, there are still memorable ones, enough to do plenty of lists on them in the past, plug, but considering how much death is dealt out in the average release, only a small percentage of them leave much of an impression on the player. One easy way to grab your attention though is to whack a main character completely out of the blue with little warning and even less fanfare afterwards. Sure, this occasionally is done purely for shock factor, but there's no denying that a swift drive-by of a death works wonders in slapping the player in the face and making them pay attention. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com and these are 10 devastating video game deaths that came out of nowhere. Number 10. KAIDEN or Ashley, Mass Effect. Mass Effect prided itself on being all about player choice, and nothing summed up that more at the time than the decision to save either KAIDEN or Ashley. By this point in the original game, you will have made a couple of decisions that shape conversations or small parts of the narrative, but nothing too substantial, and certainly nothing which prepared you for the sudden role as Judge, Judy, and Executioner. Likewise, nothing in the narrative really suggested that one of these characters had to die. Sure, Shepard and his crew were put in an impossible situation with not enough hands on deck, but when the commander starts ordering around his team, you assume that no matter how perilous the situation might look, this is only partway through the game and everyone will be fine. Of course, that is not the case. Admittedly, you might not be too emotionally affected by the decision, as you have to either condemn the space racist or the world's most boring man to death, but it still came out of nowhere. Number 9. FABIANA, Max Payne 3. Proving he's the world's worst bodyguard, a drunken Max Payne completely fails at protecting FABIANA, the wife of a notorious Brazilian real estate high roller, from being kidnapped early in Rockstar's third game. With a renewed purpose, the rest of the title plays out with Max battling his own history of self-sabotage in order to chase her across the city and rescue her from a brutal gang. It's all relatively standard shooter fare, a the princess is in another castle story, but with way more headshots and drug use. However, it turns out it's not quite this simple, and while you expect Max's quest to save FABIANA to be his driving force for the rest of the experience, his own way of ensuring that he could protect a family after failing to save his own, that's not actually the case. In fact, when you finally do catch up to her, she's brutally executed before you even have a chance to make a move, leaving both Max and the player wondering what the hell the remaining half of the game is even going to be about. Number 8. Booker, BioShock Infinite. The original BioShock became defined by its subversive storytelling, boasting major twists and turns that forced players to rethink how video game stories could even be told. The most impressive thing about the sequel then is that even with everyone prepared for a bunch of mad reveals, it was still shocking when they all arrived. From Booker also being the villainous Comstock to the reveal that there's always a man, there's always a lighthouse, the developers kept the twists coming right up until the final moment when the player themselves was killed. It is shocking, but it's a moment which makes sense narratively. Booker also being Comstock means that you can't have one without the other, so while you might have stopped the dictator in one timeline, there's always going to be another where you didn't. The brutality of the moment is what's particularly surprising though, as Elizabeth, your companion throughout the game, and your own daughter, coldly drowns Booker to stop the horrors to come. Number 7. Abigail Marston, Red Dead Redemption. It was, of course, tempting to put John Marston on this list because he's by far the most memorable death from Red Dead Redemption and definitely the saddest, but there is actually one that has far fewer fireworks and hits just as hard. After John's death, the game jumps forward in time to pick up with an older version of his son Jack. However, not only is this a character who's lost his father, but we pick up with him standing over the graves of both his parents, as Abigail Marston has also died at some point in the time jump. It's tragic because it means that in a way John died in vain, as the rest of his family only encountered even more misery following his legacy being put to rest. Likewise, the reason for Abigail's demise is left a bit of a mystery, and is doubly emotional considering that she was only 37. Red Dead Redemption 2 makes this even more heartbreaking after the fact, as Abigail plays a much bigger part in that story, and is the person you root for the most to escape a life of robbing and killing, all in the knowledge that it would never ever last. Number 6. Sergeant Paul Jackson, Call of Duty Modern Warfare. It's impossible to understate just how shocking Call of Duty Modern Warfare's approach to death was back in 2007. Most military games at the time had you controlling the sole hero capable of saving the world, but COD took the exact opposite approach, making you part of a team, a cog in the machine of eternal warfare. Of course, when you're not the chosen one, that means you're also very, very expendable. The original Modern Warfare made that perfectly clear in the Shock and Awe mission, where upon extracting from a battlefield, player character Sergeant Jackson's chopper is caught in the blast wave of a nuclear explosion. The thing is though, he doesn't die outright, and the next mission picks up in the wreckage. The implication is that you might be able to survive, no matter how improbable it might be, and somehow you could crawl your way to victory. All you're able to do at the end of the day, however, is pick yourself up and observe the destruction on display before succumbing to your injuries in the most horrific way. Number 5. Sarah, The Last of Us. Yeah, I know, it's another list about deaths that prominently features The Last of Us, but look, it's not my fault the game is so good that it demands to be mentioned every single time this topic pops up. This isn't on me. Probably. The opening to Naughty Dog's opus is one of the most instantly affecting in gaming history, as it initially subverts expectations by putting you in control of Joel's daughter Sarah, rather than Joel himself. From there, you experience the beginning of an apocalypse from a child's perspective before control eventually switches to the father as he carries Sarah to, what we hope is anyway, safety. Of course, it's not to be, and despite shielding her from incoming gunfire, Joel's daughter is shot dead in the opening prologue. You do expect tragedy to strike in some form, but just how visceral the scene is, and how there's hope that Joel might have done enough to save her, makes it a real shock to the system that keeps you on edge for the next 15 hours. It really is a doozy, and hey, it's a good thing that The Last of Us didn't do any more unexpected deaths in the series after this, isn't it? Eh? Number 4. Caroline, Wolfenstein, The New Colossus. Wolfenstein The New Colossus has such a weird opening. The original game essentially ended with hero BJ Blazkowicz bleeding out after a brutal final battle. Content in the knowledge that if his wounds wouldn't cement his fate, that a nuclear strike was on its way to finish the job. It was set to be a poignant send-off for the long-serving hero, but the sequel picked up immediately after the original cut to black, revealing that BJ was saved by fellow Resistance members, including leader Caroline, who spearheaded the victory at the end of the first game. 5 months then pass, but the game quickly gets back into the action as the Resistance HQ is attacked and you and Caroline are taken prisoner by Frau Engel. Though BJ may have once been able to get out of a sticky situation like this, his injuries now have just left him completely powerless, and neither he nor the player can do anything as they watch Engel hack off Caroline's head. The leader admittedly probably had to go at some point so BJ could step up and adopt the same role, but nobody expected it this early on, especially after an already oppressive opening. Number 3. Aunt May, Spider-Man. I don't think anybody went into 2018 Spider-Man expecting to cry, but there were no dry eyes by the time the credits rolled. That's because Insomniac decided to make the ballsy move of killing off Aunt May at the end of the game, adding real consequences and stakes to what was expected to be merely a fun superhero romp. Even when May gets sick with the biological weapon that's been dispersed all over NYC, you as the player don't really take it all that seriously. Sure, it sucks that she's sick, but in your head, you can do the storytelling math and see how this will be a great motivator for Peter and the player, and the reward of seeing her pull through in the end will result in one of those fist-pumping moments of heroism that makes games like this so satisfying in the first place. But of course, she doesn't pull through. Instead, Peter is given the choice to be a hero in a scenario that can't be won by beating the bad guy to a pulp. He has to choose between his aunt or the entire city, and he bears the burden that only a real superhero could. Number 2. Cole Phelps, LA Noire. Unlike a lot of the characters on this list, there was never any guarantee that Cole Phelps would make it out of LA Noire alive. After all, the kind of stories the game was sending up reveled in surprise deaths of protagonists and subversive downer endings that saw corruption, crime, and politics all win out in the end. With that said, it still didn't prepare anyone for how Cole would actually bite the dust. The finale of Rockstar's Troubled title had ambitions that exceeded its reach, and for a chunk of the final act, you actually play as a new character, Jack Kelso. When you pick back up with Cole, it's for the final mission, where you hunt down an old army buddy who's been manipulated into burning down houses, and then you just get drowned in a sewer. It is jarring to say the least, and totally unsatisfying to say the most. You half expect Cole to just show up again, the water having not killed him, but he never does, and instead he kinda goes out like a chump. Number 1. Sean, Lenny, KIERON, everyone. Red Dead Redemption 2. By nature of being a prequel, fans already had an inkling as to who would make it out of Red Dead Redemption 2 alive, who needed to make it out the game alive, and who was locked in to bite the dust. Even then though, the way Rockstar offed its cast of outlaws was surprising at every turn. The bloodshed truly started with Sean, who enjoyed a bullet to the face out of nowhere during a robbery in Rhodes. From there on, all the supporting cast was killed with little warning or build-up, whether it was Kieron's headless body being ridden into Dutch's camp, or Lenny taking a couple bullets to the chest during a particularly botched heist. It's all purposefully called to showcase just how cruel the Old West is, and even though you know most of these characters are destined to die, you never know how or when, and it is devastating. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any out of nowhere deaths that I missed off here? And were you as surprised as these as I was? Either way, while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to WhatCulture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.